This week on Capital Connection, we take a look at the final 2 weeks of the legislative session, including a big energy bill that might be coming soon.
We're going to have to pay for that. It's largely out of our control.
And Republican Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer joins the show to talk about the governor's own budget team lowering revenue estimates for this year.
Over the last 6-7 years since Governor Pritzker's been in office, our budget has increased by $15 billion from 40 billion. So, you know, there are ways to get back to a sense of reality.
And Illinois could soon create a statewide office for public defenders. Joining us on the show is Champaign County Public Defender Elizabeth Pollard.
There are too few of us, our budgets are too small, and as a result, we're not able to provide the level of representation that all of our clients deserve.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Cole Henke is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Cole Henke. We officially have 2 weeks until the end of May when lawmakers should be passing a state budget by. But this week they got some tough news as the governor's own financial forecasting team lowered revenue estimates by $500 million, putting it in line with the legislative forecast that we've seen this month so far, and also putting a $500 million hole in the governor's February budget proposal.
This is all part of the process, right? And so I'm not nervous at all that we won't get to where we need to go. We will pass a budget that is balanced, not just balanced financially, but balanced morally, to make sure that the people of Illinois have what they need and deserve.
Republicans are already trying to build resistance against potential tax increases that could be used to balance the budget. Representative Ryan Spain honed in on an idea of a service tax being bad for business on Wednesday.
One of the reasons why we wanted to come down here today was to really raise the alarm over some of the tax increase solutions that may be getting traction here in this building.
No tax increases have been formally proposed in the legislature. Representative Cam Buckner says there is a lot to do before the end of May and wouldn't rule anything out.
The goal obviously is never to balance the budget on the backs of the people, and that remains our goal moving forward.
And now let's turn to another big topic that's going to be taking up a lot of space here at the end of this session. We're talking energy legislation with Senator Bill Cunningham. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We've talked even earlier this session before about some priorities you have for Illinois' energy grid, one of them being battery storage for a lot of the clean energy sources that we've been building up in the state over the past several years. Let's just start there. Is that going to be a priority for this omnibus bill we're expecting to come in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, we definitely need to take some sort of action, and I'll tell you why. This summer, Illinois ratepayers, electrical consumers, are going to get an unpleasant surprise in their energy bills. They're going to see increases, and they are directly attributed to the regional transmission organizations that manage the grids, two separate multi-state grids that Illinois is a part of. They are going to increase our bills to pay for what we call capacity. Capacity is what power plants provide at the highest times of demand. So like in the summer on a 90-degree day, everyone's air conditioning is running, more energy usage. We have to pay a premium to these regional transmitting organizations for energy at that time. They do an auction to establish the price, both a southern Illinois grid and a northern Illinois grid, and both have come back with much higher rates. We're going to have to pay for that. It's largely out of our control. So what we have to look at is what do we control as Illinois legislators related to the electrical bills our constituents pay, and what can we do to lower pressure? There are two immediate ways we can do that. One is with battery storage, by incentivizing the development of facilities that can take in electricity at a time when the demand is low and the price is high, and then dispatch it, store it there, hold it, and then dispatch it at times when demand is high and the price is high. And that will have the natural effect of suppressing the prices. So we can do that by incentivizing developers in the state to build batteries. And that's something we really want to accomplish this year. Another thing we want to do is lower demand. And one of the ways to do that is to promote energy efficiency. So we're working with the utilities, with Ameren and ComEd and the environmental community and consumer advocates to try to figure out a way to incentivize the utilities to spend more money on energy efficiency programs, which costs money up front, but in the back end lowers demand and lowers prices. So those are things we can control as legislators, and that's what we're going to focus on the next couple of weeks here in Springfield.
Things like battery storage, incentives for building battery storage fields. What's the ramp to getting to those things being functional?
So
is this something that we could see multiple years of these kinds of increases?
That unfortunately is the problem. This is not something we can flick the switch on and have happen tomorrow. It's something that's going to take a couple of years to put in place. So as a result of that, we will not see an immediate reduction in those capacity prices I talked about. But we anticipate these capacity prices to remain high and go even higher over the next couple of years because of increased demand for electricity. So we have to start right now on these efforts like battery development, like energy efficiency, so we can keep these increases we can keep our bills level and prevent continued increases going into the next 4 or 5 years.
As with any energy debate in this building, it's very multifaceted,
yes.
And that's what we're expecting this final bill to be. Tell me a little bit about more of what's on the table. Are we talking, maybe, are there any potential revisions to past clean energy policy that we've had? Is there any work to be done on nuclear?
Yes.
A lot of Republicans are still focusing on natural gas as a potential fix to the issue. What could potentially be a part of this package?
So I think there are a lot of very wonky, detailed things related to the way the state procures funding for renewable projects that you can see there'll be some tinkering to hopefully get renewable projects on the grid quicker. You mentioned nuclear. I think there is building momentum here in the State House right now for relaxing a nuclear moratorium that has been in place in the state for a number of years. Back in the 60s and 70s and into the early 80s, the state invested a lot in nuclear power. Nuclear power kind of went out of fashion because of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, but we've seen the safety record of nuclear plants improve, and this recognition that nuclear generation is carbon-free, so does not harm the environment the way coal and gas generation does. So there is increased interest in increasing Illinois' advantage when it comes to nuclear generation, and we may do that by at least relaxing the cap on new development that might let Constellation, which is a company that happens to own all of our nuclear plants, develop a new reactor at one of their existing plants. This would be a big help to addressing the increased demand we're seeing for electricity that is largely driven by data centers right now. It's not a panacea. Developing a nuclear reactor is very expensive. We want to make sure that if it is done, it is paid by what is creating this new demand, the data centers, and not by ratepayers.
Well, that's an interesting point because when the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was passed, the advent of AI, data centers, it's sucking up so much of this energy, was not really considered. This was the new element. This is what caused this increase in energy need. And I'm just curious, did Illinois jump too quickly into that market, or was that inevitable given the way that technological trends are going? We've seen Governor Pritzker especially welcome these businesses in.
Yes.
Was that poorly timed, or was that just the way that everything ended up going?
I don't think anyone imagined the level of growth that has occurred. As you said, when we debated CEJA, when we negotiated the bill, no one talked about data centers. We had heard of them, but no one ever saw them becoming an issue. They've become a gigantic issue, and it's because of AI. We're seeing a shift to quantum computing that eats up even more energy. The development of cryptocurrencies is also extremely energy intensive. We knew there was going to be an increased demand for electricity. No one knew it would be at these levels. And we have to react to that. And I think the answer is we want to welcome data centers into the state because they create jobs, construction jobs. They also pay a lot of property taxes to our local governments, particularly our schools. that's something we need to keep our property taxes down, is have new businesses come in and contribute to those property tax levies. It will create property tax relief for the rest of us. So we want to welcome data centers, but we want to do it in a way where they're not leaching too much power from the system that is going to affect whether or not the lights go on. So that's why ramping up generation is really important. We can use nuclear, we can use renewable. We might also have to see a delay in the closure of some of the gas plants that are scheduled to close in 2030 and 2035. We don't know about that yet. We'll see if we can ratchet up the pace of renewable development, but that's something we might have to look at in the future.
In one of your previous answers, you talked about getting renewable sources on the grid quicker, and that for people at home might not realize, you can build the windmills, you can build the solar fields, but getting it connected to the larger grid has been where the issue has really lied recently. The transmission lines that connect it to the larger grid really, when those aren't there, it isolates these sources to very small areas of the state that get to benefit from that energy produced. A lot of that is on those regional operators that you already discussed. And if the regional operators can just say, we're going to charge more, and they don't have that level of accountability that, maybe your local group, your local energy provider, an Ameren, for instance, or something has, or even the lawmakers in this building have, where does the pressure come from to speed that process up at the regional level, especially considering Illinois has a much more progressive view on energy policy than a lot of its neighbors and a lot of members of these regional operators?
Yes. You raise an outstanding point, Cole. Again, we very much have our hands tied by these regional transmitting organizations, two of them multi-state organizations that operate in the state. And it is frustrating. I think what we're going to see, it's a little bit late for this year, but it likely will be a discussion in the General Assembly next year, is about the future of our membership in these RTOs. Is that really the best thing for the state? There are other states that have created their own state transmitting organizations, New York, Texas, and California. They've done it with some mixed success, but I think we're going to need to study that and consider, is that the way for future for the state? The state of Illinois at this time produces 130% of the energy we consume. We are an exporter of energy. I think we have to consider, is that the best deal for those of us in Illinois? Or does it make more sense for us to take a look at maybe setting up our own transmission organization? There is no easy answer to that question because there are potential negative implications from that. So I think it's something that deserves some study and consideration. I think that's something we'll do next year.
So the energy export, the fact that Illinois is an energy exporter, is that going to change in the next few years, as we see data centers ramping up? And I guess we've talked about the way that energy usage is going to increase. Is that going to change? Is Illinois going to continue to be an exporter?
It's a good question, and I think it's hard to say right now. I think if we see the renewable development that's in what we call the queue, the line, we have a 5, 6, 7-year line for these renewable projects to get on that multi-state grid. If that continues to be delayed, then there is some question about whether or not the state can produce the energy we need. In December of this year, as a result, this was something that was required in CEJA, the big energy bill we passed in 2001, the ICC, the Illinois Commerce Commission, the State Environmental Protection Agency, and the State Power Agency are going to put out a joint report, and it's called a Resource Adequacy Report. And they're going to look at all these things we're talking about, and they're going to make a recommendation back to the legislature and tell us whether or not we are going to have the resource adequacy, the generation adequacy we need for the next 5 years. And I think we will take that report to heart, and it may create momentum for making some of the changes we just talked about. Maybe to the RTOs, maybe we talk about forming our own RTO, maybe delaying the closure of some of the gas plants that are scheduled to close in 2030 and 2035. we want to improve our environment. We want to stop the pollution that these plants are causing, but we also want the lights to stay on. So that's a balance we're going to have to strike over the next couple of years. And I think that report that comes out at the end of this year will really set the roadmap for the next 5 years.
All right, well, I look forward to taking a look at that. But Senator Cunningham, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Joining us now to help break down these last couple of weeks of session is Republican Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So
Appreciate it.
I want to start with the Gombe report that came out just this week, basically affirming what we already knew, the governor's budget proposal from February, essentially short $500 million, a pretty big total to be wrong on for that deficit. Now everybody's at the drawing board trying to figure out what this budget is going to look like, where the cuts are going to come from. There's a lot of murmuring about if revenue is going to be the game plan here going forward as well. I want to get your opening thoughts on just where we're at right now, middle of May, for the budget with just a couple of weeks left.
Yeah, we've got, and let's keep in mind that the budget, the proposed budget was still increasing by over $2 billion. So we have $500 million less than that. So it's still going to go up $1.5 billion, which is insane. You know, over the last 6-7 years since Governor Pritzker's been in office, our budget has increased by $15 billion from 40 billion. So, you know, there are ways to get back to a sense of reality. You know, we've kind of been a bunch of kids in a candy store for the past 6-7 years with all the COVID money that's come in and all those different dollars. And now it's time to be adults and kind of tighten our belt a little bit and see what we need to do. I would obviously say that the healthcare programs for illegal immigrants are the first place that we should cut, especially looking at proposals that are coming from the federal government that might affect our Medicaid match for our current citizens.
So yeah, to go off of that, the governor's proposal already accounted for half of that program being cut. The 42 and to 64-year-olds, that program was already going to be cut. Still needs $500 million additional more.
Yeah.
It's kind of a wait and see game on what happens to the immigrant seniors program. But where else can the state even look to tighten the belt when we have, you know, obligations to continually increase spending in places like education? There's pensions, obviously. Then you have agencies like DCFS where there's been this consistent increase in funding to try to fix some of the problems that agencies had in the past. There's a lot of areas that are expecting, if not increases in funding, at least stable funding. Where do you see other potential places where the belt can be tightened?
Yeah, you know, there were, over the last few years, we've had a lot of pork projects that were Democrat-only pork projects that were in the budget. Some of those are continuing into this coming fiscal year. So certainly that would be a place where we could cut and say, look, we're not doing any more of this. We have an obligation to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves first, developmentally disabled, services for senior citizens, things of that sort. And then we have to obviously think about, you know, working class families. Unfortunately, the Democrats right now are talking about a $6 billion, more than $6 billion tax increase, which is absolutely insane. You know, as I said earlier, $15 billion more than 6 years ago, and now they want to add $6 billion. The people of Illinois just are tired.
You're referring to the list of proposals that were put out by the more progressive members of the Democratic Party,
Yes,
correct?
Absolutely.
Has there been have you heard anything about whether that's actually getting some traction? Because there are some revenue proposals being floated out there, but that big of a list is not something that we haven't heard from the leaders. I had one of the lead budget negotiators in the House, Cam Buckner, on just a couple of weeks ago, and he said that they still do not want to raise taxes. That was still the goal for this negotiation. And going from that to $6 billion increases seems like a pretty hard pivot.
Absolutely, but you never know. You know, we've seen year after year after year, they stuff these things into the budget implementation bill last minute. It hasn't gone through the committee process. It hasn't gone through the normal process that every other piece of legislation goes through. Last minute, when the individuals and the majority of the people in the House specifically right now have not been through a tough budget. So we're seeing a time where they're used to being able to get almost anything they want, and now they're not. So they may be willing to raise taxes, and I just want to make sure that the people of Illinois are on their toes, paying attention, because these things happen pretty quick.
What do you think about every year Governor Pritzker has like a new project that he wants to get done? This year there was a really interesting one in which he wanted to essentially demolish, renovate old state sites that are decrepit, abandoned, and one of them is in your district. One of them takes up a big chunk of Jacksonville. Those programs would cost a pretty penny to clean up those sites and put them and get them ready for sale. Is that something? Is the state in the position to do that project now, or is that something that maybe should cut down on the line items?
And that's one of those things. When I look at my priorities for budgeting, it's taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves and investing in future infrastructure and things of that sort. Right now, the state's paying an exorbitant amount to try to maintain these properties that they basically just walked away from. While Jacksonville is no longer in my district after the new remap,
I apologize.
The reality is there's sites like that sitting all over the state that the different departments have turned over to CMS. CMS is mowing them, but outside of that, not a whole lot is being done. And we all know the reality of projects and costs and cost overruns. It's not going to be cheaper in 5 years. So let's go ahead and get this done now. Move along, get it back on the property tax rolls for development.
You mentioned the proposals coming out of Washington conflicting with Illinois policies. We are seeing proposals in Congress that would lead to pretty big cuts in Medicaid across the board. And there's also other fears from state budgeteers about what kind of money is going to be coming from the federal government to different state agencies. So much so that they've talked about, House Speaker Chris Welch floated the idea of maybe having to come back later in the year to modify the budget based on what DC does, what Congress does. What are your thoughts on that idea when we still don't have that federal spending plan set in stone yet?
Yeah, and they don't pass a budget until probably August. So we'll see. But the reality is a lot of this is scare tactics. But we know that there's scare tactics from Democrats in the state of Illinois to blame federal government for the issues. But we know that the federal government is supposed to be in charge of immigration and homeland security and things of that sort. So the reality is the state of Illinois is denying the federal government the powers that we granted to them as a state. So we have to look at this and we have to say, the federal government's saying, we have an immigration policy. States like Illinois and California, you have to follow these policies for us to remain a safe country. So there's a legal process to go through. If you choose not to go through this process, you may lose Medicaid funding, right? So we know going into this that there's a possibility that we could lose Medicaid funding because of us providing free health care for illegal immigrants on the backs of Illinois taxpayers. So I think this is the time where we have to say, well, let's not worry about calling their bluff. We can't afford it right now. Let's get rid of the HBIA and HBIS programs right now, and we don't have to worry about that even being a possibility for the state of Illinois. And we don't have to put the concern on the backs of those who are provided health care through Medicaid.
I want to shift because you spoke a little bit this week about some of the energy grid problems that the state is facing. Just had Senator Cunningham on the show as well to talk about the Democratic proposals, what this energy omnibus bill could actually look like. The big thing that he's focused on is battery storage for the clean energy sources that have been built up in the past few years. And trying to make those clean energy sources more reliable for when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, I guess. So from your perspective, though, what are your thoughts on the way that the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act has been proceeding, and knowing now with the advent of AI, increase in processing centers and data centers, the energy grid demands are just too high for what we have right now. What are your thoughts on where the state should go?
We have, unfortunately, in the state of Illinois, we have a perfect storm that was created by legislation, right? We have generation going down because we're taking coal and we're not allowing natural gas to come online, which are the huge baseline providers of energy generation. And then we also have technology coming in that requires, like you said, an exorbitant amount of energy. So the reality is we have to have reliable energy. We have to have, everybody expects that when they walk into a room that they flip that light switch and it turns on. And so we have to continue to provide for that. The reality about battery storage, for instance, my concerns with that is we're trading one environmental issue for another. I don't know if you saw recently, they talked about a huge lithium deposit that they found out in Oregon. And the folks out in Oregon who tend to be a little bit more on the environmental side are saying, no, we don't want you to mine this. But it's okay when it comes from a third world country. It's just not okay when it happens right here in the state, or in the United States. So if it's bad for the environment in Oregon, it's probably bad for the environment in some third world country across the world. So, I just want to make sure that we're being very truthful with ourselves, because I care about the environment. I want my kids to grow up in a safe, clean environment. We're moving very faster than we can to keep up with the generation needs. And I'm okay with trying new things along the way, but to believe that wind and solar are going to take the place of gas and coal is just not realistic.
Before even the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act passed, we did see some coal generation plants. It wasn't like that business was booming before we saw that pass. There were plants being decommissioned without the state deadlines already being put in place. Is that, and that rock is already going.
Yeah.
It's already snowballing. So what's the potential solution there? Or is it something completely alternative from both, and it's start building nuclear faster?
And there's some of that was agreements with the Obama administration back in the day about coal ash and how coal ash is dealt with at coal power plants. And I understand some of those closures were coming along already. But the reality is we're also saying that you can't turn these coal facilities into natural gas, which natural gas right now is the cheapest form of energy that we could produce. And if you add, my understanding in talking with people from the energy sector, they said, look, we can have a win-win by collecting methane, adding 15% into the natural gas, which would create a carbon neutral form of energy production, which would be amazing. And these are things that we could do. I mean, obviously we'd have to build the infrastructure, but if we start today, we'll have that cleaner form of energy being created right away, reliable. Natural gas can peak up and it can go down. It's one of the few that can actually do that. So I think we really need to look back and look at natural gas. We need to get away from the environmentalists saying gas is bad, okay, right? We need to say we can make it cleaner. We can do it better. And so if we focus on those things, we can have that clean baseline generation.
All right, well, Representative David Zumeier, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're now going to turn to a different piece of legislation that could be getting its day in the spotlight here in Springfield. It's a bill that would create a statewide office for public defenders. And joining us now is Champaign County Public Defender Elizabeth Pollock to help discuss it. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We actually had you on last spring, probably around the same time of year, to talk about the need for this office. And this has really stemmed from the passing of the Safety Act and the just increase in volume, case volume, and an increase in the amount of work that's happening on the front end of these cases now. Tell us a little bit about why a office for public defenders, a statewide office for the public defender, would be necessary and what services that could bring, especially to smaller counties across the state that don't have access to these services.
Well, currently in the state of Illinois, there is no statewide mechanism for regulating or assisting public defenders with carrying out our constitutional obligations. Every office of the public defender is county-based. We are all kind of on our own individually, and depending on what your county's budget is, that can be a very different situation for us across the state of Illinois. And the issue has been studied a lot over the last few years. It began with a report from the Sixth Amendment Center in 2021, and that report found that we were struggling to provide the basic level of representation that we are required to because of a lack of resources, a lack of staff, and other issues that affect pretty much every public defender office in the state. And then thankfully, the Illinois Supreme Court took up the issue. They studied it, they created a task force, and they ultimately agreed that public defenders in our state need more resources. There are too few of us, our budgets are too small, and as a result, we're not able to provide the level of representation that all of our clients deserve. And so finally now, this issue has hit the spotlight, and the FAIR Act is the result of a couple of years worth of study and negotiation between all stakeholders in the criminal justice system to better support our local public defenders.
So when we talked about this last year, there was actually some conflicting priorities, I would say. This has been something that Senate President Don Harmon has been pushing for the past year now in the Capitol. But last year we saw it run into some roadblocks on exactly what the priorities should be. The Senate President's proposal differing from what we saw from some advocates in this system. And I'm just curious if you see some noticeable changes in this year's proposal compared to last year. And could you go into detail if you do see them on why those are important?
Certainly. Well, we appreciate the attention that has been paid to this issue by the Senate President and by others, including all of the co-sponsors of the FAIR Act. I think there is broad agreement between everyone that this office is a necessity. We have to provide better representation. It's a state obligation. Our clients need it. And frankly, our staff needs it because we are all exhausted. We haul way too many cases. It's very difficult to compete with the private sector and even other government agencies in terms of pay scale. And so I think there is a broad consensus that the FAIR Act is absolutely necessary, and that applies across the board. The difference really between this proposal and the one that was advanced last year is the level of detail. So the parties, that being the legislators, public defenders, I know that people have spoken with judges, state's attorneys, sheriffs, everybody who has a stake in the criminal justice system has been talking about how this bill should look and what it should accomplish. And so fundamentally, what has been determined is the level of detail that we are asking for in the FAIR Act. And so not only does it establish the office of the statewide public defender, but it also goes into pretty significant detail about the Public Defense Commission that is going to advise that statewide office. It talks about data gathering and a way to, figure out exactly how many cases there are, what the needs are. There really hasn't been a lot of attention paid to that, and there's really no mechanism for studying it since every county is siloed kind of on its own. And so in addition to that, when we're talking about just the statewide PD, of course, we're talking about resources for local public defenders. We're talking about figuring out, though, in general, how best to support the system in terms of the number of staff that are needed. There is no workload management of public defenders in Illinois. There's no caseload maximum. There's no regulation or advice to us about, when is it too much? When do we really need to stop taking new cases because we're not able to survive at the level that we're at? And so the act is very detailed in that regard. And so the main mechanisms here are creating the office, creating the commission, talking about how to gather this data and ways that the office can then support in turn the counties that are really struggling.
So with this office, I'm curious how, I mentioned it at the top, there's the implementation of the SAFE-T Act and this recognition of just how lacking these resources were across the state, especially. And from now on, there's going to, in the next few years especially, there's going to continue being this discussion about the elimination of cash bail, how that system gets tweaked, and how that, finding out possibly ways that there might be some changes coming down the road. And how crucial would it be to have that centralized statewide office to not just be there to help standardize rules or help provide that detail for these offices, but to also just be a presence here in this building for for the public defenders of the state. And, you know, given that you mentioned the private sector, there's plenty of people advocating for them here in this building. You're pretty busy with your job. You're not making it here every day to lobby lawmakers as well.
Right. Well, I think that the mechanism for data gathering and synthesizing that data and presenting it at a state level is going to be crucial in determining exactly what resources are needed and where. But we're also envisioning that the statewide public defender is actually going to be able to supplement the counties in terms of not only potential resources like expert witnesses or counties that don't have enough finances to even employ a single investigator or a single social worker. But we're talking about, I mean, there's really quite a large disparity in the sizes of the counties. I mean, there's 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and we're all radically different from each other. Everybody's budgets are different. Everybody's resources are different. And so some counties, like I feel very lucky in Champaign because people understand the need for our office, and I've been able to get support from our local county board. That has been wonderful. But there's a lot of counties that simply don't have any resources at all for their office of the public defender. So conceivably, the state public defender would be able to step in and provide supplemental resources to the counties that simply can't afford it at all.
Got it. So this is likely to be heard in committee at least soon here. It's already passed out of the House. It's into the Senate, where Senate President Don Harmon is taking it up. What are you going to be looking at the most as these debates kind of continue around this bill? And hopefully, you know, from your perspective, it sees that light of day to get to that finish line. What are the biggest hurdles that still need to be cleared, obviously, besides the votes?
Well, honestly, I think there is a broad consensus in support of this bill. And I feel very optimistic because we have finally, for the first time, people are paying attention to this issue, which really has been going on for a very long time. The issue of understaffing, underpay, under-resource, that for public defenders has been going on for years. I think that the SAFETY Act kind of brought it into stark relief because it added even more obligations on the front end of every case beginning. And so that really made things significantly worse in terms of the resources that we have to expend. It's good for the clients. It's a good bill. And I think it is a fair bill because I think we can all agree that a person's financial status should not dictate when they should be in custody and when they shouldn't. But it certainly has increased the workload, and that has kind of put a spotlight on this issue. Everyone who has looked at this issue, from the Sixth Amendment Center to the Illinois Supreme Court to local public defenders and the Public Defender Association, I think we all agree that something like this is necessary. And this bill has been the result of a lot of negotiations between a lot of different stakeholders. I think we have reached a significant level of consensus, and I am very excited to see what happens next week.
All right. Well, Elizabeth Pollack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We will be right back. That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hank.